Welcome back, everyone. We are diving deep today into that really unsettling space where the terrifyingly physical seems to meet the profoundly psychological.
That's right. We take stacks of complex sources, often dense academic texts or historical documents, and boil them down into the essential knowledge you need.
And our focus today, well, it's possibly the most famous, certainly one of the most intensely documented cases of perceived spiritual affliction in modern history. We're talking about the Smurl haunting.
Yeah, this specific case, which unfolded over, 15 years?
Right.
From the mid-'70s through the late '80s.
Right.
In a seemingly unremarkable duplex, in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. It's just the perfect vehicle for the kind of analysis we do.
It really is. The family's ordeal was so publicized, they claim levitations, these inexplicable foul stenches, blood-curdling screams. It's intense stuff.
And our mission here, it's really far beyond just retelling a ghost story, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're using the Smurl family's experience. And remember, this affected Jack and Janet Smurl, their 4 kids, Dawn, Shannon, Heather, and Corinne, and even Jack's parents next door. We're using it to explore 2 vastly different but equally rigorous frameworks.
Okay, so on one side, we've got the, let's say, precise language of historical demonology. We're pulling from actual treatises on demonic infestation, some dating all the way back to the 15th century.
And then on the other side, we bring in modern clinical theories. We're looking at trauma, dissociation, consciousness itself, and even the development of specific psychological syndromes, like haunted people syndrome, that try to explain these recurring supernatural reports.
So we're really seeking to understand how humans, whether you're looking through a spiritual lens or a scientific one, how we attempt to categorize phenomena that just violently resist a simple, rational explanation.
It's a story that launched books, major Hollywood films. It's
Yeah.
captured the public imagination. But we need to understand the nuts and bolts of the haunting itself before we start layering on these complex theories. So let's unpack the affliction.
Okay, so to set the scene, Jack and Janet Smurl move into their half of this duplex in October 1973.
Right.
Jack's parents, who also get caught up in all this later, they move into the other half just a couple months after that.
And the family apparently always felt something was a bit off about the house, like wrong or unsettled from the foundation up.
Yeah, that's the background feeling.
Yep.
But the full-blown paranormal events, what the sources are calling the affliction, that really kicks off much later, like over a decade later, around 1985.
And these initial incidents, they weren't subtle, were they? Not just bumps in the night. They were often shockingly physical, immediate, and seemed weirdly targeted at, like, domestic life.
Exactly. Janet Smurl recounts one of the first really major structural things. It happened April 29th, 1985. Apparently, it was the day of their daughter Shannon's confirmation.
Okay.
And that day, this massive light fixture in the kitchen, described as being like 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, it just suddenly crashes down onto the kitchen table. And Janet was very clear. It wasn't like a gradual break. It was violent.
Yeah.
A matter of a split second, she said.
Mm-hmm.
The impact was bad enough to actually gouge Shannon on the forehead and leave a deep scratch on the refrigerator.
That's terrifying. And what makes that so compelling and kind of resistant to just saying, oh, it was faulty wiring or whatever,
Right.
is the secondary evidence. Jack's father-in-law, apparently a handy guy, right? He looked at the scene,
Yeah.
and he noted that this heavy fixture, it was held up by 2 separate chains. And he basically insisted there was no way it could have just fallen straight down instantly. Logically, one chain should have given way first, making it swing or break unevenly before hitting the ground.
So the physical evidence itself suggested something else, maybe an instantaneous external force, not just gravity and wear and tear.
Exactly. And that seems to set the stage for more domestic weirdness, stuff that seemed designed to just undermine their whole sense of security at home.
Yeah, they reported constant issues with closet doors opening and closing. Specifically, this louvered door in the master bedroom, which apparently didn't even have a handle or knob that something could easily grab onto. So how's that happening?
And the disappearing objects.
That pattern continued, right? Things
Yeah.
vanishing and then reappearing in these oddly deliberate ways.
Yeah, Jack mentioned his stainless steel medical alert bracelet. He wore it constantly. Apparently only took it off to shower. It would just disappear.
Gone.
Gone. And later, his daughter Heather's rosary beads went missing, only to reappear later, placed as nice as you please, right on top of the neatly made bed.
Okay, that's just creepy.
Yeah.
It suggests not just chaos, but like an intelligence behind it. Almost mocking.
It feels like that, doesn't it? And this wasn't just happening on their side of the duplex. Jack's parents next door, they also experienced things, particularly focused on water anomalies.
Water. Like,
Yeah.
Jack recalled being in his shower and hearing water running on his mother's side. He and Janet would go check, and they'd find the toilet flushing. Not just once, but multiple times.
Weird.
And his mother-in-law reported coming home after being away and finding cupboard doors open and standing water in the sink. So whatever this was, it seemed contiguous. It spanned the whole building.
This is where it really starts to ramp up, though, isn't it? Because the activity apparently escalates pretty quickly from these domestic nuisances to, like, direct targeted attacks.
Oh, massively. The sources indicate something like 80% of the reported activity was concentrated upstairs, especially in the master bedroom, really focusing on Jack and Janet.
And the sounds got worse.
Acutely violent. They reported continuous, violent banging and knocking, often waking them from a dead sleep. And critically, it wasn't random. They'd hear sets of 3 knocks.
The classic 3 knocks.
Exactly. 3 knocks on the commode, 3 knocks in the corner, and maybe most pointedly, 3 distinct knocks right underneath a crucifix and a rosary hanging in the bedroom.
Okay, that pattern. That feels deliberately provocative, doesn't it? Especially the religious element. It's not just house-settling noises.
Not at all. It suggests intent. And then the assaults became terrifyingly personal and physical. Janet was reportedly levitated.
Levitated.
Yeah, and thrown violently against a wall by some unseen force. Jack described feeling intense, localized burns on his body, like something unseen was inflicting them, and they'd leave actual physical marks.
Hey, burns. Good grief.
But maybe the most horrifying, certainly the most enduring visual, was Jack apparently coming face to face with some kind of creature. He described it as monstrous, with a pig-like snout, and it directly threatened him.
Whoa, okay, so that's not just sounds or feelings anymore. That's a full-on visual sensory assault.
Absolutely. And it seems like whatever this entity or entities were, they could sort of evolve or adapt their tactics. Because near Christmas one year, new sounds appeared, distinct whistling and humming. Yeah, sounds described as trying almost like sing a song, which shifts the feeling from just pure aggression to something almost more unsettlingly domestic and intimate. Like it's mimicking human activity.
That is profoundly disturbing. And the psychological toll this relentless activity took, I mean, it must have been immense.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Janet specifically talked about how the constant doubt, the inexplicable nature of it all, it caused them to basically gaslight themselves,
Yeah.
questioning their own sanity because nobody else believed them or could explain it.
Right.
They were suffering from chronic sleep deprivation, constant fear. She said they looked like zombies.
You can only imagine. Now, this is where we absolutely have to bring in the skepticism noted in the sources, because this sets up that core conflict we're exploring, external versus internal explanations.
Crucial point. Because while the Smurls did seek help from people like a psychic medium, Betty Ann Moore, who diagnosed malevolent forces intending harm,
Right.
there are 2 really significant counterarguments in the
Get
record.
over there.
Well, the first is purely environmental. Subsequent owners of the house, after the Smurls finally left, reported nothing unusual at all.
So that suggests the activity was tied specifically to the family, not the physical location itself.
Exactly, which leans towards something internal or specific to them. And the second counterargument is medical, and it's highly relevant to Jack Smurl himself.
Okay.
He had a documented medical history. He'd suffered from meningitis, and crucially, he'd undergone brain surgery at some point.
Ah.
And certain theories propose that someone with that kind of medical history, well, brain surgery can sometimes, potentially, allow access to repressed trauma or memories. Or it could, theoretically, contribute to experiencing powerful hallucinations.
So that provides a direct clinical pathway to potentially interpreting that pig snout creature, or even the physical sensations like burns, as maybe neurological events rather than external demonic attacks.
Precisely. It doesn't dismiss the experience of terror, but it offers a completely different explanation for its source. And that tension is exactly what we need to explore next.
Okay, so that tension, physical reality versus internal experience, it's the perfect bridge, isn't it? We leave the specific case history for a moment and dive into the world of clinical psychology.
Yeah, this is where concepts like possession get rigorously reframed, often as dissociation. And to really get that, we need to start with the fundamental concept of the trance state itself.
Trance. Okay, not just stage hypnotism, right?
No, not necessarily. The definition in our source material is broader. It's presented as a genuine, altered state of consciousness, a state where possibilities that are normally inaccessible, they suddenly become available to the person in the trance.
Possibilities, like what?
like unusual physical sensations, altered perceptions, access to different memories, or even personality states. And it's key to distinguish this broad trance from hypnosis,
Hmm.
which usually implies one person acting on another. Trance can be self-induced through things like meditation, intense ritual, extreme stress. Or it can be externally induced through talking, touching, certain rhythmic movements or passes.
Okay, but what's actually happening in the brain or mind during trance? What's the core mechanism?
It hinges on the relationship between our conscious and unconscious processes. The conscious mind, which the sources call the reflexive, executive, or ego consciousness, that's what gets fundamentally dissociated from the unconscious processes during a trance state.
Dissociated, meaning separated from.
Yeah, kind of walled off or pushed aside temporarily.
Mm.
And normally this conscious mind, it acts like a really aggressive gatekeeper. It has what's termed the veto power.
Veto power. I like that. What is it, veto?
Basically anything rising up from the unconscious, ideas, urges, sensations that doesn't fit with the person's established frame or map of the world, that veto is absolutely critical for, well, for sanity.
Mhm.
Its whole job is to ensure conformity to your operating reality.
So if my map says the world is rational, physics works, my veto power blocks any weird subconscious impulse suggesting, I don't know, that my teacup might float.
Exactly. Or that a voice I'm hearing isn't my own thought. That veto power maintains your reality tunnel, partly by narrowing your attention. You focus only on frame-relevant stimuli. You filter out things that don't fit your worldview.
Okay.
And partly, it works through specific muscular tension patterns. We literally hold our bodies rigid against unsettling internal impulses or ideas that don't conform.
Wow. So if you're in a state where that veto power weakens.
Then the established world map can just rapidly disintegrate. And this connects directly back to what the Smurls reported, that self-imposed gaslighting. They were actively, desperately struggling to maintain their rational map against overwhelming experiences that just didn't conform. Their veto power was under siege.
Okay, that makes sense. And this mechanism, this weakening of the veto, it leads us to a really radical psychological argument that's in the source material, doesn't it?
It does. It's the assertion that involuntary possession is fundamentally the same phenomenon as multiple personality disorder, MPD, which we now clinically know as dissociative identity disorder, or DD.
The same phenomena. It's huge.
It is a huge claim. The connection is rooted entirely in the morphology, the shape of the trance state, and the emergence of these alternate identities, or alters. In both scenarios, possession, and did the primary conscious mind steps aside, it dissociates,
Right.
allowing a separate identity, whether you label it a demon, a spirit, or an alter personality, to take the stage. The argument is that the difference is purely in the cultural interpretation applied to the experience.
So one culture says demon, another says alter personality, but the underlying dissociation is the same.
That's the theory. And the sources point to this explosive growth in reported MPD and demonic possession cases in America, particularly in the late 80s and 90s. They suggest this growth might have been heavily influenced by the interpretive strategies being used by certain therapists and counselors, especially those using psychodynamic approaches, who were perhaps actively looking for, and maybe even cultivating, these alters.
Okay, that's a massive claim with huge implications. But if possession is simply D/D or MPD, how do these clinical theories account for the objective physical phenomena reported in cases like the Smurls? How does DD make a 4-foot light fixture crash down when everyone's wide awake?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The purely psychological view has to filter those reported physical events through mechanisms like suggestion, maybe shared perceptual distortion within the family unit, or often emphasizes the idea of secondary gain.
Secondary gain, what does that mean in this context?
It refers to the unconscious or sometimes conscious advantages a person might get from adopting a specific role or condition. The source material points out that during that period of heightened interest, the role of the possessed person or the MPD survivor actually became, quote, increasingly attractive.
Attractive? That sounds really counterintuitive when we're talking about potentially severe trauma or distress.
It does. But think about the potential social and psychological benefits, however unintentional. It offers a structure, an explanation for overwhelming feelings. It can grant the person permission almost to speak in different voices, to explore or discover these layers and layers of personalities. And perhaps crucially, it can garner a kind of hushed respect and sympathy from their social network, the community, the church, therapists. The sources are quite explicit, saying that describing the perceived benefits often understates the perceived benefits for the individual. It can become a socially validated identity that allows the person to externalize tremendous internal suffering and receive attention, support, maybe even a kind of status for it, even if the suffering itself is undeniably real.
That's a complex and potentially controversial way to look at it, but it provides a powerful internal explanation for why someone might manifest these symptoms or why they might persist.
Exactly. It focuses on the function the state serves for the individual within their social context.
Okay, so that covers the extreme end, possession as a full identity disorder. But the sources also introduce a more modern classification for people who currently report maybe less dramatic, but still persistent supernatural events, right? This haunted people syndrome, or HPS.
Yes. HPS is a newer concept designed specifically for individuals who repeatedly report supernatural encounters in everyday settings. The weird noises, fleeting shadows, strange smells, feelings of presence.
The kinds of things many people report experiencing occasionally, but for these individuals, it's recurrent.
Exactly. And HPS links these encounters not necessarily to an external entity, but to the individual having heightened somatic sensory sensitivities to their own internal distress. These are often subclinical disease states, anxiety, unease, physical tension that get immediately interpreted through the lens of their existing paranormal beliefs.
So HPS basically suggests that these anomalous experiences can function as an idiom of stress or trauma, like the body and mind expressing distress in a paranormal language.
That's a great way to put it. And the proposed mechanism behind this sensitivity is rooted in something called transliminality.
Transliminality. Okay, what exactly is that? How does it make someone susceptible to HPS?
So transliminality, in simple terms, it refers to having a more permeable or thin mental boundary between your conscious awareness and, well, everything else, subconscious material, subliminal perceptions from the outside world.
So people who score high on transliminality are kind of more open. Their filter is less robust.
Essentially, yes. They're more open to information flowing both from their inner world unconscious thoughts, subtle somatic sensations, emotions, and from their external environment, faint stimuli, the emotional states of others.
So someone with high transliminality might feel a minor stomach ache or a sudden chill or maybe just a vague sense of unease.
Right.
And because they lack that strong mental filter, that robust veto power we talked about, they might immediately interpret that internal sensation as an external threat, like a presence or the start of a haunting.
Precisely. They're acutely sensitive to these internal distress states. And the HPS sources describe a study looking at a family they called them Nell, Rod, and Jill, who were experiencing hauntings. And their reported anomalies strongly correlated with high scores on both transliminality and paranormal belief scales.
Ah, so the belief system is key too.
Absolutely. Those factors were coupled with reaction patterns that aligned with threat or agency detection, basically. They were primed to see intention and danger in ambiguous stimuli. The researchers attributed the manifestations to this thin mental boundary functioning happening in the face of unfavorable circumstances or overstimulating environments.
Unfavorable circumstances, overstimulating environments.
And it's often exacerbated by poor emotion regulation skills and strong confirmation biases. Once you believe it's happening, you look for evidence and you find it.
This sounds like it mirrors the Smurl case almost exactly. They were definitely in an overstimulating, unfavorable environment for years. Chronic sleep deprivation, which, absolutely tanks your ability to regulate emotions.
Wow.
They already seemed to have a baseline belief in the paranormal or were open to it, and their internal distress was likely amplified by perceptual contagion. Everyone in the house, even the parents next door, started seeing or hearing things, reinforcing each other's experiences.
Right, it becomes a feedback loop.
So HPS kind of contextualizes their chaos as maybe a severe stress-induced loop driven by individual sensitivity and group dynamics.
It's a very compelling, comprehensive psychological model for understanding how profound internal turmoil can manifest experientially as an external threat, forcing the individual into that cycle of self-imposed gaslighting that Janet Smurl describes so vividly. It frames the horror as originating from within, amplified by belief and environment.
Okay, so we thoroughly established the modern, clinical, largely internal view of something like the Smurl haunting, thinking about dissociation, trauma, HPS. Now let's completely shift gears. Let's take the exact same phenomena, the knocking, the stenches, the fear, the creature, and apply the ancient external framework of historical demonology.
All right, we're winding the clock back. We're heading primarily to Northern Europe, roughly between 1400 and 1600, to see how religious authorities and scholars systematically tried to understand and categorize these often subtle domestic disturbances.
And for Orthodox theology back then, the explanation was pretty straightforward, wasn't it? No ambiguity.
For the theologians, generally yes. It was singular and quite rigid. Demons existed solely as fallen angels, period. They were the primary culprits behind virtually all haunting phenomena. Visible apparitions, unsettling movements of objects, weird sounds, creepy feelings,
And there were always bad news.
always associated with sin, temptation, illusion, trying to lead people astray. But, and this is crucial, theologically their power wasn't arbitrary. It was always governed by divine permission. God allowed it to happen, usually for testing the faithful or punishing sinners. So every demonic act ultimately fit within a divine plan.
But you mentioned, even back then, the popular imagination, like folk tales, didn't always stick to that strict good versus evil binary.
That's right. While the high-minded scholastic theology insisted on these strict classifications, folklore and vernacular stories often held on to more ambiguous spiritual creatures. You see hints of it even in high medieval literature, like in Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parsifal or Dante's Inferno. They reference things like neutral angels.
Neutral angels.
Yeah, entities who apparently chose neither heaven nor hell during the Great Rebellion. They existed in this kind of liminal space that didn't quite fit the theologians' neat categories. It shows a popular resistance to purely binary thinking about the spirit world.
Interesting. But when the focus narrowed specifically to the domestic sphere of the home, the source of the Smurl's terror demonologists, like Johann Weyer, the 16th century physician, felt the need to get more specific, right? To actually classify the types of spirits messing with households. He basically mapped the spiritual geography of the home.
He really did. Weir developed a kind of taxonomy based on the spirit's function and, importantly, its level of malice. At the sort of lower, maybe less harmful end, you had the Luries.
Luries, like the Roman household gods.
Yeah. Similar name. But in Weyer's context, these were spirits thought to possess the home in comparative peacefulness. They often seem to mimic servant duties. You might hear sounds like someone descending stairs, opening doors, maybe noises like food being prepared. They're often seen as somewhat benign house spirits.
But Weir didn't think they were actually helpful.
No, he stressed they were really doing nothing at all. He saw them as ultimately deceptive, even if seemingly benign, just illusions.
Okay, so from the Lyras, we move up the scale of malice.
Definitely. Next up were the larvae, sometimes called brutes. These were described as dwarf-like horrid spirits. They were considered harmful and wicked by nature.
So the opposite of the Lyras.
Exactly. Their sole purpose, according to this classification, was to disturb and terrify the household in every imaginable way. Pure, chaotic affliction. These sound much closer to the more aggressive phenomena the Smurls reported.
Absolutely. And finally, the category for the noisemakers.
Yes, that brings us to the koboloi, or known by various regional names like kobolds, Vixtolin, or Helikeplin. These were generally classified as peaceful yet mischievous goblins, or sometimes as imitators of men. They were considered minor, noisy demons.
And this concept of the noisy spirit is what leads us directly to that specialized German term we still use all the time today, right?
Precisely. That term is, of course, the poltergeist, which literally translates from German as noisy or rumbling ghost. Poltern meaning to make noise, and Geist meaning ghost or spirit. Gerumpel just means disruptive noise or clutter.
Why was it so theologically important for demonologists back then to have a specific category just for a noisy spirit? Why not just lump it in with larvae or koboloi?
It was actually a crucial piece of theological boundary keeping, especially during the Reformation. The term poltergeist became necessary in the late medieval and early modern period because it helped demonologists clearly classify these noisy disturbances, the banging, the rapping, the thrown objects, as exclusively demonic in origin.
As opposed to what? What was the alternative they wanted to avoid?
The main concern, particularly for Protestant reformers like Martin Luther, who rejected the Catholic doctrine of purgatory outright, was that these noises might be misinterpreted as spirits from purgatory, seeking prayers or aid from the living.
Okay. So defining them as poltergeists, as lesser demons, shut down that possibility.
Exactly. By consistently classifying poltergeist phenomena as the work of lesser demons who possessed less power from God than the truly major fallen angels, they could maintain Protestant doctrinal purity and dismiss any connection to purgatory. It neatly contained the phenomenon within their accepted demonic framework.
Got it. So we have the different players, the lares, the larvae, the poltergeist demons. Now, how did historical theology distinguish between the different types of attack? Because that seemed critical for deciding how to respond, right? Whether you just needed a blessing or something more drastic.
That's probably the single most important theological distinction in this whole area, because it dictates the ritual response. You have obsession or oppression, which is defined as torment from without. The forces are vexing the person or the place externally, like the banging on the walls, those Smurls heard, objects being thrown, those oppressive atmospheres.
The external attack.
Then you have possession, which is torment from within. This is where the entity is believed to be actually residing inside the person's body, influencing their thoughts, speech, and actions directly.
And the Smurl family, based on the reports, they clearly seem to experience a long period of obsession and oppression, right? The external stuff, which then maybe culminated in those terrifying visual and tactile encounters blurring the line.
It certainly seems that way. A prolonged siege from the outside, punctuated by moments of terrifyingly direct, almost invasive contact.
And the sources are really clear that demons, in this theological view, don't just rely on brute force or making noise. Their primary weapon is supposedly their intellectual cunning.
Absolutely. According to theologians like Thomas Aquinas, demons retain their superior natural abilities and intellect even after their fall from grace. They are smarter, faster, and have knowledge beyond human capacity.
And they use that to deceive.
That's their ultimate strategy. Deception and sensory manipulation. They cause what theologians termed disordered sensory experience. This is precisely how they attack that conscious mind's veto power we discussed earlier.
How do they disorder the senses?
They supposedly darken the senses with darksome affections, like creating feelings of dread or despair. They fill the understanding with obscuring mists, confusion, doubt, and they can leverage their superior knowledge of natural processes to mechanically control the mind and manipulate all five senses simultaneously.
Okay, this suddenly explains a lot of the specific, often bizarre phenomena reported not just by the Smurls, but in haunting cases globally throughout history.
Exactly. The throwing of stones or objects, that classic poltergeist activity, the sudden, inexplicable, rancid smell of meat, the specific audible tricks, like the whistling the Smurls heard or the knocking under the crucifix. These are all presented in historical texts as classic demonic markers of sensory manipulation, specifically designed to confuse the person experiencing them.
So the whistling isn't just random noise, it's an audible trick. The pig snout creature Jack saw is a visual deception. The burns he felt are a tactile assault.
Precisely. By attacking sight, sound, smell, touch. The demon aims to ensure the human cannot trust their own perception. The goal is confusion, to make you doubt your reality, to make you question your sanity, which leads directly back to that self-imposed gaslighting Janet Smurl mentioned. It's a strategy.
And finally, this kind of affliction, in the theological view, it rarely stays confined to one person or one room, does it? It spreads through contagion.
Yes, that's a key aspect in this worldview. Demonic affliction is often seen as spreading like a spectacle, a chain reaction of torments. It infects the inhabitants of a place with sheer terror, feeding on itself. This perfectly describes the Smurl scenario, doesn't it? The terror didn't just stay in Jack and Janet's bedroom.
No, it spread to the children, it spread next door to the parent.
Exactly. Ensuring the affliction wasn't just a personal trial, but a collective, community-wide crisis, multiplying the fear and confusion.
Okay, so we've set the stage. A modern family enduring this overwhelming chaos, which can be interpreted either as deep psychological trauma manifesting externally or as literal theological warfare. We absolutely have to turn now to the prescribed responses. According to the occult and theological studies you looked at, how does a person or even a house become infested or targeted in the first place? What creates the entry point for the diabolical?
Well, there are a couple of main pathways described. Infestation can apparently happen through external trauma tied to the location itself, like a violent act, a murder, which is believed by some to leave spiritual echoes or a vulnerability in the place.
Okay, so the location itself can be compromised.
Yes. But perhaps more commonly emphasized, especially in theological sources, is the idea that the devil, or lesser demons, gain an entree, an entry point, through a person actively or passively inviting dark spirits into their life or home.
How? Through what kinds of actions?
The sources consistently point towards things like willful, unrepented sin, holding on to heretical beliefs, or specifically developing an interest in the occult.
Yeah, the occult connection. So this means activities that many people today might see as just benign spiritual exploration or even entertainment are flagged as potentially grave dangers in this specific theological context.
Absolutely. The list of potential entry points is often very specific. Participating in seances, using Ouija boards, engaging in forms of divination like tarot cards or scrying.
What about things considered maybe new age?
Yes, those are frequently cited too. Things like channeling spirits, practicing astral projection, or even engaging in seemingly harmless energy manipulation techniques associated with various New Age practices. The underlying belief here is that these activities deliberately open doors or create vulnerabilities that negative entities can exploit.
And there are anecdotes supporting this view.
Yeah, one source details the story of an individual who apparently recovered from a severe demonic attachment only after completely abandoning all their New Age practices. It really emphasizes the deeply held belief within these frameworks that such practices aren't neutral. They actively serve as invitations for evil.
Okay. So, faced with this perceived attack, the Smurl family responded by leaning heavily into their existing faith, right? Specifically, their Catholic tradition.
They did. They reportedly tried to strengthen their family unity by joining hands, praying intensely together, trying to create a unified spiritual front to combat this supernatural threat.
And that faith provided the framework for seeking ritual intervention.
Exactly. The traditional Catholic approach relies heavily on established rituals and the use of sacramentals, blessed objects. So you have the importance of hallowed ground, the intervention of ordained priests, the use of lustral water, which is consecrated holy water, and ultimately, if need, the formal rite of exorcism itself, which is specifically designed to alleviate demonic vexation or possession.
But the Smurl case is particularly noteworthy, isn't it? Because it seems to illustrate the limits of these rituals, or perhaps the exceptional power of whatever entity they were dealing with.
It really does. According to the accounts, two separate house blessings performed by Catholic priests reportedly failed to stop the anomalies.
Yeah.
The banging, the smells, the fear, it all continued.
That must have been terrifyingly demoralizing for them.
Immensely. And there's this powerful moment captured in the sources where one of the priests involved in an intervention attempt, even though the ritual didn't seem to work overall, noted feeling a distinct sense of something powerful rushing past him while he was working. Like he encountered something even if he couldn't dispel it. Furthermore, there's another account where a priest involved later privately confessed his own doubts about whether his exorcism attempts had truly resolved the family's deep-seated issues, even during periods when the demonic activity seemed to quiet down temporarily. It suggests that even within that religious framework, there was an acknowledgement that this specific entity or affliction was unusually resistant to the standard sacramental tools.
This reliance on ritual, on physical sacramentals, the crucifix, the holy water, the priest's blessing, that's a really critical point of difference, isn't it, when you compare it to the historical Protestant response to haunting phenomena, especially during the Reformation.
Oh, it's a vital contrast. Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and also Ludwig Lavater, who wrote a very influential book called Das Gespensterbuch, the Book of Ghosts, they vehemently rejected most Catholic rituals and sacramentals, and particularly the whole doctrine of purgatory.
Right, we touched on that, since they insisted all haunting phenomena had to be demonic illusion.
Their advice for Christians facing these things was fundamentally different. It was twofold. Yes, use prayer, relying on scripture. But crucially, exercise deliberate disregard of the noises and illusions.
Deliberate disregard, just
Yeah.
ignore it. Why was that considered so central, so powerful for the reformers?
Because it was seen as a direct theological weapon against the demon's primary strategy. If the demon's power relies on causing confusion, deception, exploiting that disordered sensory experience to make you doubt and fear,
Okay.
then denying the phenomena any attention, refusing to react to it, essentially denies the demon its power. Lavater argued that these sounds and apparitions are mere illusions, audible tricks meant to lead Christians astray from focusing on God and Scripture.
So, by deliberately ignoring the banging on the wall or the toilet flushing repeatedly, the Christian is refusing to grant the illusion power over their mind.
Exactly. They are choosing to focus solely on the constancy and clarity of their faith in Scripture rather than the confusing sensory input. They are, in essence, using their intellectual and spiritual veto power to reject the premise of the demonic attack.
It's like an internal cognitive defense mechanism, isn't it? Instead of fighting the external force physically with rituals, they're fighting it mentally by refusing to validate the deception.
That's precisely the idea. This belief is rooted in the notion that the demon's influence often relies on leveraging confusion, maybe through what one source even termed powerful telepathic hypnosis, something that makes individuals doubt their own perceptions. So if you choose to disregard the phenomena, you are fundamentally affirming your own sanity, you're grounding in faith, and denying the reality of the deception.
The Smurl family, enduring years of this relentless torment, they essentially experienced a profound spiritual and psychological war waged directly against their power to disregard, their capacity for self-regulation, their ability to trust their own minds.
Absolutely. Jack and Janet described feeling like they were living in a bunker, with a war constantly going on above and around them. And whether you ultimately view that war as a manifestation of profound and internal trauma finding external expression, or as a genuine infestation by an external entity, the sheer tenacity of that unseen force, whatever its origin, speaks volumes about the fragility of human perception when it's relentlessly and systematically targeted. Hashtag tag outro. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think we've really navigated that core tension inherent in the Smurl haunting, haven't we? We've managed to simultaneously analyze this modern family crisis through the psychological lenses of things like haunted people syndrome, clinical dissociation, the impact of trauma,
Right, the internal perspectives.
while also applying that ancient external framework of demonic oppression, infestation, and even Ware's historical taxonomy of household spirits.
And the Smurl case really forces us, and you listening, to reckon with the staggering power of belief and perception, doesn't it? Were those events, the levitations, that horrifying pig snout creature Jack reported, the burning sensations, were they ultimately subjective manifestations of intense internal distress, maybe exacerbated by Jack's medical history, maybe high transliminality within the family?
That's one possibility.
Or were they the result of genuinely external, subtle forces? Entities operating with a superior, perhaps non-human knowledge base, specifically aiming to deceive and afflict, just as scholastic scholars like Aquinas theorized centuries ago.
And we learned earlier how crucial that veto power of our conscious mind is. It's the mechanism we rely on every single second, every day to keep our experience coherent, to make sure things conform to our established rational map of the world.
But that mechanism, that filter, it must be incredibly strong, working constantly just to keep the potential chaos of raw perception at bay.
It really must be.
So here's the provocative final thought we want to leave you with today, something that connects both the clinical and the cosmological views we've discussed. If that foundational map of the world, that sense we have of a secure, objective, predictable reality, if that's our greatest defense, what happens when a phenomenon, whether you believe it's purely psychological or genuinely paranormal, deliberately and repeatedly attacks the very mechanisms of attention, perception, and belief?
Hmm.
When the noise just never stops, when the objects keep moving without any reason, when the terrifying creature appears right there in front of you, how long can any human being maintain that crucial veto power? And how soon before you might be left completely unable to distinguish reality from delusion, sanity from utter chaos?